I'm Terry Smith, a primary teacher, and welcome back to part 2 of our Come Follow Me lesson on Alma chapters 43 to 52, Stand Fast in the Faith of Christ. Now, in the first part, we talked about Moroni preparing the Nephites with armor and fortifications. Today, in this part, we're going to talk about Captain Moroni and how I can be faithful like Captain Moroni. Moroni was a faithful and strong disciple of Jesus Christ, and he inspired the Nephites to live the gospel. In fact, he was very saddened when parts of the Nephites began to disobey and seek to be more like the Lamanites. So as we talk about Captain Moroni, have this question in your mind. What can we learn from Captain Moroni's example? Okay, so how can you and I follow that example in being a disciple of Jesus Christ? Let's start out in chapter 46, and we're going to read verse 12. Here, there was a man named Malachiah who was a dissenter of the Nephites. That means he was a Nephite, but he no longer wanted to be a Nephite. So he became a Lamanite. And that was one of the things that really saddened Moroni. And so Malachiah wanted to become the leader of the Lamanites and fight the Nephites. And in verse 12 it says, "And it came to pass that he rent his coat." That means Moroni tore his coat. "And he took a piece thereof and wrote upon it, in memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children. And he fastened it upon the end of a pole." Now, what did Moroni mention there that he wanted the Nephites to remember? Did you catch those? There were 6 things. God and religion, so those two kind of go together, right? Freedom and peace, and those two kind of go together. And then wives and children, so our family. So that might be an easy way to remember those 6 things. And he helped them remember those things by writing them on a piece of his coat and then putting it on a pole. And he actually did that on many pieces of fabric, so that every city would be able to see that. That was his cause, and he called it the title of liberty. Isn't that a great title? Because that's what he was fighting for. He was fighting for the liberty of his people. What things do you think Heavenly Father wants us to remember? Do you think he wants us to remember those same things? In fact, the first commandment is, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, and strength." So I think he definitely wants us to remember him and his son, Jesus Christ. And what about our religion? I think he wants us to remember that too. And I live in the United States, and so we have rights and freedoms here and privileges. And I think he wants us to remember those. The right of religion, and freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom to gather, so that we can meet together as saints in the church. All of these things I think he wants us to remember, but also our families. For our families are what's most important to us. So I don't think things have changed very much at all since that time of Moroni. That God still wants us to remember those same things and to protect them and preserve them. So what was Captain Moroni like? So if we can follow his example and be faithful like him, what are his characteristics? Let's read, in chapter 48, verse 17. And we'll learn a little bit more about Captain Moroni. One thing that is that, do you know that he was only 25 when he became the leader, really the general of the Nephite army? That might seem old to you, but to me, that seems really young to be the leader of an army. And let's read 48:17. Yea, verily, verily, I say unto you, if all men had been and were and ever, I lost my place, ever would be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever. Yea, the devil would never have power over the hearts of the children of man. Wow! Could you imagine someone having the ability to shake the powers of hell? I'd like that power. Would you like that power? That's how righteous Moroni was. So what are the characteristics that made him that kind of a man? If you and your family will read verses 11 through 16 of this chapter, you'll discover more about Captain Moroni and write down some of the things that you discover. I made a list, and I'll share my list with you, and then you can compare it. He was strong. He was mighty. He had a perfect understanding. I'd like a perfect understanding. Wouldn't you, especially when you're taking tests? He did not delight in bloodshed. And here he was, the general of the army. He didn't like killing people. He didn't like seeing blood. But yet his cause was so great that he was willing to do that. His soul did joy in the liberty and freedom of his country, and liberty and freedom from bondage and slavery. His heart swelled in thanksgiving to his God. So he was thankful for God for all of the blessings that he received. He labored exceedingly for the welfare and safety of his people. When they weren't fighting, remember, they were building up their fortifications and making sure that everyone had armor. He was firm in the faith of Christ, and that's standing fast, right? So that goes right along with our title. He defended his people, their rights, their country, their religion. He was guided by God. He believed that if he was righteous, that God would warn him of impending danger or attack and would help him to know where to go. And God did guide him. His heart did glory in doing good. He kept the commandments. He resisted iniquity. And by doing these things, he strengthened his people spiritually and physically. Now think about these specific things, these specific characteristics of Moroni, and pick one that you would like to develop a little bit more. And even include that in your prayers. So when you're praying and talking to Heavenly Father, ask him to help you develop that characteristic. And in this way, Moroni became a greater disciple of Jesus Christ and more like him. So as we strive to follow the example and be faithful to Jesus Christ like Captain Moroni was, we too can develop these great qualities and characteristics and stand firm in our faith and trust in the Lord as he guides us and warns us about impending temptations. Wouldn't that be a great blessing for the Lord to protect us and warn us? I certainly want that blessing. And so I invite you now to take the time to write down these characteristics of Moroni. And remember, pick one and start working on it and praying and asking Heavenly Father to help you. Now this is the end of part 2. And with this lesson, remember, we have 3 parts. So in the next part, we'll learn about Amalickiah. and his cunning and deceit to become the king of the Lamanites. So stay tuned.